Tell us in the comments where in the world you are watching from and at what time, so I can get to know you better. To support the channel for free, don't forget to subscribe and like the video. From a tiny city-state on the Italian peninsula to a colossal empire that shaped the very foundations of Western civilization, its story is one of unprecedented ambition, brutal conquest, and spectacular collapse. For 1,000 years, Rome was the center of the world, a crucible of law, engineering, art, and warfare. But how did a republic forged on ideals of liberty transform into a tyrannical empire ruled by god emperors? And what cataclysmic forces brought this seemingly invincible power to its knees? Join us as we journey through a millennium of glory and ruin, charting the epic rise and the dramatic fall of the Roman Empire. Every great power has a creation myth, a story whispered through the ages that blurs the line between history and legend. For Rome, that story begins not in a grand palace, but in the wilderness, with twin boys suckled by a she-wolf. The tale is rooted in the ashes of Troy, with the hero Aeneas escaping his fallen city to fulfill a destiny on the shores of Italy. Generations later, his descendant, Rhea Silvia, a Vestal virgin, is said to have been visited by the god of war, Mars himself. From this divine union, the twins Romulus and Remus were born. Their very existence was a threat to the throne of their great uncle, King Amulius, who ordered the infants to be cast into the Tiber River. But fate, or perhaps the river god, had other plans. The basket carrying the boys washed ashore at the foot of the Palatine Hill, where they were discovered by a she-wolf, the Lupa, who miraculously nursed them. They were later found and raised by a humble shepherd, Faustulus, and his wife. As they grew into manhood, their noble bearing and natural leadership set them apart. They became leaders of a band of young shepherds, their true identities still a secret. Eventually, the truth of their royal lineage was revealed, and in a swift act of justice, they overthrew the usurper Amulius and restored their grandfather to the throne. But their destiny was not to rule an old city. It was to build a new one. They returned to the 7 hills where they had been saved, but their unity soon fractured. A dispute arose over which hill to build upon and who should rule. To settle the matter, they turned to augury, the practice of interpreting the will of the gods through the flight of birds. Remus, on the Aventine Hill, saw 6 vultures, but Romulus, on the Palatine, saw 12, declared the victor. Romulus began to plow the sacred boundary, the Pomerium, for his new city. In a fit of jealous mockery, Remus leaped over the half-built wall, a sacrilegious act. Enraged, Romulus struck his brother down, declaring, "So shall it be for all who dare to cross my walls." On that blood-soaked ground, on April 21st, 753 BC, the city of Rome was founded, born from a divine lineage, nurtured by a beast, and consecrated by the ultimate sacrifice of fratricide. For over 2 centuries, Rome was ruled by kings. Some were wise, others were builders. But the last, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, or Tarquin the Proud, was a tyrant. He ruled not by law or tradition, but by fear. He seized power through assassination, executed senators without trial, and bled the people dry with his grandiose building projects. The spirit of Rome, forged in the hardship of its founding, was being crushed under the weight of his oppression. The people chafed, but it would take a singular, horrific act of violation to finally ignite the flames of revolution. The catalyst was not a battle or a political decree, but a personal tragedy that became a national rallying cry. The story centers on Lucretia, a noblewoman renowned for her virtue and beauty, the wife of a respected Roman officer. While the men were away at war, the king's son, Sextus Tarquinius, consumed by lust, crept into Lucretia's home, and under threat of death and dishonor, brutally assaulted her. The next day, Lucretia summoned her father, her husband, and their most trusted friends, including the quiet, unassuming Lucius Junius Brutus. She recounted the horrific events, her voice steady with resolve. Then, after making them swear an oath to avenge her, she drew a hidden dagger and plunged it into her own heart, choosing death over a life of shame. Her sacrifice was the spark. Brutus, who had long feigned idiocy to survive under the tyrant's reign, pulled the bloody dagger from her chest. Holding it aloft, he swore a solemn oath not just to avenge Lucretia, but to expel the Tarquins and ensure that no king would ever again rule Rome. His words electrified the grieving men and soon the entire populace. The story of Lucretia's tragic fate spread like wildfire, transforming private grief into public outrage. Brutus led the enraged citizens to drive Tarquin the Proud and his family into exile. The monarchy was shattered. In its place, a new form of government was established, a res publica, a public affair. Power would no longer be concentrated in the hands of one man for life. Instead, it would be entrusted to two annually elected consuls, who would govern with the advice of the Senate. In 509 BC, the Roman Republic was born, founded on a rejection of tyranny and consecrated by the blood of a virtuous woman. As the young republic grew in strength, its ambitions collided with the other great power of the Western Mediterranean, the maritime empire of Carthage. What followed was not a single conflict, but a century-long struggle for survival and supremacy, known as the Punic Wars. The First Punic War forced Rome, a land-based power, to become a naval force, ultimately winning control of Sicily. But this was merely the prelude. The true crucible for Rome would be the Second War, a conflict defined by one of the greatest military minds in all of history, Hannibal Barca. As a boy, Hannibal had sworn a sacred oath upon an altar to be a lifelong enemy of Rome. He made good on that promise with terrifying efficiency. In 218 BC, he did the unthinkable, leading his army, complete with war elephants, on an audacious and brutal march from Spain, over the treacherous Pyrenees and the frozen Alps, and into the heart of Italy. He descended upon the Roman legions like an avenging storm. One by one, he annihilated Roman armies at the battles of the Trebia, Lake Trasimene, and most famously, at Cannae. At Cannae, Hannibal executed a brilliant double envelopment, a tactical masterpiece that resulted in the slaughter of an estimated 50,000 Roman soldiers in a single day. It was one of the most catastrophic defeats in Rome's history. Lesser powers would have shattered. Rome's allies defected, and panic gripped the city. Yet, Rome did not break. It endured. Under the cautious strategy of Quintus Fabius Maximus, they refused to engage Hannibal in open battle, instead shadowing his army and waging a war of attrition. While Hannibal rampaged through Italy, unable to land a decisive knockout blow, a new Roman general emerged, Publius Cornelius Scipio. Scipio understood that to defeat Hannibal, he had to change the game. He took the war to Carthaginian territory in Spain, and then, daringly, to North Africa itself, forcing Carthage to recall its greatest general to defend the homeland. The final epic confrontation took place in 202 BC on the plains of Zama. Scipio, having studied Hannibal's tactics, turned them against him. The war was over. Rome had been pushed to the absolute brink of annihilation, But in surviving its trial by fire, it had proven its resilience and emerged as the ascendant power of the Mediterranean. The defeat of Hannibal at Zama was a turning point, not just for Rome, but for the entire ancient world. The existential threat was gone, and in its place was an insatiable appetite for expansion. The century that followed the Second Punic War saw the Roman Republic transform from a regional Italian power into an intercontinental empire, the undisputed master of the sea they now called Mare Nostrum, our sea. The final embers of Carthaginian resistance were brutally extinguished in the Third Punic War, which ended in 146 BC with the complete and utter destruction of the city of Carthage. Legend says, the Romans sowed the earth with salt to ensure nothing would ever grow there again. In that same year, the legions also completed their conquest of Greece, subjugating the once mighty Hellenistic kingdoms. From Spain to Anatolia, from the coasts of Africa to the plains of Gaul, Roman influence was absolute. This rapid expansion brought an unprecedented flood of wealth, slaves, and foreign cultures into Rome. Triumphant generals paraded through the streets, followed by long trains of captured treasure and enslaved peoples. The city of Rome itself was transformed, adorned with new temples, aqueducts, and public buildings funded by the spoils of war. But this golden age of conquest concealed a deep and growing sickness within the Republic's heart. The immense wealth was not shared equally. It flowed into the pockets of the senatorial elite, who bought up vast tracts of land, creating enormous plantations called latifundia that were worked by cheap slave labor. The small citizen farmer, the traditional backbone of the Roman army and society, was driven off his land, unable to compete. These dispossessed farmers flooded into the city of Rome, forming a volatile, unemployed urban mob. The very fabric of the Republic was tearing apart. The old system, designed to govern a small city-state, was buckling under the strain of managing a global empire. A new type of leader began to emerge: powerful, ambitious generals who, through military reforms, created professional armies loyal not to the Senate, but to the man who promised them land and gold. The stage was being set for a new, more violent chapter in Rome's story, where the Republic itself would become the ultimate prize in a series of devastating civil wars. By the middle of the 2nd century BC, Rome was the undisputed master of the Mediterranean. But victory had come at a profound cost. The endless wars had hollowed out the very foundation of the Republic. The small, land-owning farmer, who was also its citizen soldier. While patrician elites amassed vast estates, or latifundia, worked by armies of slaves captured in foreign conquests, the common soldier returned home to find his farm bankrupt and his family displaced, forced to swell the ranks of the landless, unemployed poor in the city of Rome. This growing chasm between the hyper-rich and the destitute was a powder keg, and the first spark was struck by Tiberius Sempronius Gracchus. A nobleman with a populist heart, Tiberius was elected tribune of the plebs in 133 BC. He witnessed the plight of the dispossessed and proposed a radical solution: the Lex Sempronia Agraria. This law would enforce existing limits on the amount of public land one individual could own, reclaiming the excess and redistributing it in small plots to the urban poor. The senatorial elite, whose wealth was built on this very land, saw this not as reform, but as revolution. They used their political muscle to have another tribune, Marcus Octavius, veto the proposal. In an unprecedented and constitutionally dubious move, Tiberius had Octavius deposed by the popular assembly and passed his law. But in seeking re-election, he gave his enemies an opening. Accusing him of aspiring to be king, a mob of senators and their clients, led by the Pontifex Maximus himself, bludgeoned Tiberius and hundreds of his followers to death in the open forum. The Rubicon of political violence had been crossed. 10 years later, his younger brother, Gaius Gracchus, picked up the fallen standard. More ambitious and a shrewder politician, Gaius enacted an even broader platform of reforms, stabilizing the grain price for the poor, reforming the judiciary to curb senatorial corruption, and controversially, proposing to grant Roman citizenship to Italian allies. This last proposal alienated his Roman base, and the Senate saw its chance. Declaring a state of emergency for the first time, the Senatus Consultum Ultimum, they empowered the consul to do whatever was necessary to protect the Republic. Gaius was hunted down, and in the ensuing violence, he and thousands of his supporters were slaughtered. The Gracchi were dead, their reforms largely undone, but their legacy was profound. They had revealed the deep, perhaps fatal fractures in the Republic, and had shown that in the struggle for power, the Forum could now become a battlefield, and the ultimate arbiter would not be votes, but violence. The ghosts of the Gracchi haunted Rome, their violent deaths having normalized political bloodshed. In this volatile new era, the path to power no longer ran solely through the Senate House, but through the barracks. The man who first and most devastatingly proved this was Gaius Marius, a new man from outside the traditional aristocracy who rose on the back of military genius. Facing a manpower crisis during wars in Africa and against Germanic tribes, Marius enacted a revolutionary military reform. He abolished the property requirement for military service, opening the legions to the landless poor, the very men the Gracchi had tried to help. He promised them pay, spoils of war, and a plot of land upon retirement. In doing so, he solved Rome's recruitment problem, but created a far greater one. He forged a new kind of army. These were professional soldiers who swore their loyalty not to the abstract idea of the Republic, but to the general who fed them, led them to victory, and guaranteed their future. The Roman legionary was no longer a citizen farmer, but a client of a powerful warlord. The consequences would be catastrophic. The stage was set for a clash of titans when Marius's ambitions collided with those of his former subordinate, the ruthless aristocrat Lucius Cornelius Sulla. Their rivalry festered for years, finally exploding over the lucrative command of the war against King Mithridates in the east. When the command was politically maneuvered from Sulla to Marius, Sulla did the unthinkable. He turned his legions, loyal only to him, against their own country. For the first time in its history, a Roman army marched on Rome. Sulla seized the city, forced Marius into exile, and departed for the east. But the cycle of vengeance had just begun. While Sulla was away, Marius and his allies returned, unleashing a bloody purge of Sulla's supporters. When Sulla, victorious against Mithridates, finally returned in 82 BC, he brought with him a full-scale civil war. He crushed the Marian forces and, in a terrifying innovation, declared himself dictator for the reconstitution of the Republic. He posted lists in the Forum, the proscriptions, naming his enemies. Anyone on the list could be killed with impunity, their property confiscated by the state. Thousands were butchered. Sulla's reign of terror fundamentally broke the Republic. He had shown that a loyal army was the ultimate source of power, and that the state itself could be captured and used as a weapon against one's own citizens. The Republic was now just an arena for ambitious generals, and its soil was soaked in Roman blood. In the late Roman Republic, slavery was the engine of the economy, a brutal institution on an industrial scale. Millions of men, women, and children, captured in Rome's ceaseless wars, toiled on the vast estates of the rich, worked to death in the mines, or were forced to kill for entertainment in the gladiatorial arenas. They were property, devoid of rights, their lives subject to the whims of their masters. From this pit of human misery, in 73 BC, rose a figure who would become a legend, Spartacus, a Thracian, possibly a former soldier. He was being trained as a gladiator in a school in Capua. Alongside 70 other men, armed with little more than kitchen knives and a burning desire for freedom, he broke out. This small act of defiance should have been crushed within days. Instead, it ignited the most dangerous slave rebellion Rome would ever face. The rebels established a camp on the slopes of Mount Vesuvius, their numbers swelling as runaway slaves from the surrounding countryside flocked to their banner. They were a motley collection of different peoples with different languages, united only by their chains. Yet under the brilliant leadership of Spartacus and his lieutenants, they became a formidable fighting force. They crushed the first local militias sent against them, and then, shockingly, they annihilated 2 full Roman legions. Panic began to grip Rome. This was no mere criminal uprising. This was a war. The slave army, now numbering over 100,000, rampaged through Italy, seemingly unstoppable. Their ultimate goal remains a subject of debate. Did they seek to overthrow the Republic, or simply to escape Italy and return to their homelands? Whatever their aim, they proved that the oppressed could rise and challenge the mightiest power on earth. Terrified, the Senate finally turned to the one man with the wealth and ruthlessness to end the threat: Marcus Licinius Crassus. Given command of 8 legions, Crassus restored discipline through the brutal practice of decimation, killing 1 in every 10 of his own soldiers in a unit that had fled. He systematically cornered Spartacus's forces in the south of Italy. After a failed attempt to cross to Sicily, the slave army was trapped. In 71 BC, the final battle was fought. The rebellion was brutally extinguished. Spartacus himself fell in the fray, his body never identified. Crassus made a chilling example of the survivors. 6,000 captured slaves were crucified along the Appian Way, the main road to Rome, their bodies left to rot for months. A gruesome warning to any who would dare dream of freedom. In the wake of Sulla's bloody dictatorship and the Spartacus rebellion, the Roman Republic was a wounded beast. Its old institutions, particularly the Senate, were failing, unable to control the new breed of hyper-ambitious military dynasts who now dominated the political landscape. The state was paralyzed by partisan gridlock, with a conservative faction known as the Optimates jealously guarding their traditional power against popular leaders. It was in this environment of dysfunction that 3 of these dynasts, each stymied by the Senate, decided to take matters into their own hands. In 60 BC, they formed a secret, informal political alliance that would come to be known as the First Triumvirate. It was a private pact to subvert the public state. The first member was Gnaeus Pompeius Magnus, or Pompey the Great. He was Rome's most celebrated general, But the Senate refused to ratify the political settlements he had made in the East or grant the land he had promised his veteran soldiers. The second was Marcus Licinius Crassus, the man who defeated Spartacus, and arguably the richest man in Rome. His immense wealth bought him influence, but he craved the one thing he lacked: a major military command to rival Pompey's. The third and final member was the up-and-coming political firebrand, Gaius Julius Caesar. A brilliant orator and populist with an impeccable aristocratic lineage, Caesar was deeply in debt and desperate for a consulship, followed by a lucrative provincial command where he could win military glory and pay off his creditors. Individually, the Senate could block them. Together, they were an irresistible force. This was not an alliance of friends. It was a marriage of convenience, a conspiracy of ambition. By pooling their money, political influence, and the loyalty of their clients and veterans, they bypassed the Senate entirely. They secured Caesar's election as consul for 59 BC. As consul, Caesar, often using intimidation and mob violence, pushed through the legislation his partners desired. Pompey's veterans got their land, and Crassus received financial concessions for his allies. In return, Caesar was granted what he wanted most: a 5-year command in Gaul. The triumvirate had effectively hijacked the Republic, carving up the state to serve their private interests. But this alliance of 3 powerful, ego-driven men was inherently unstable. It depended entirely on their ability to balance their rivalries. With Crassus seeking glory in the East, Pompey controlling politics in Rome, and Caesar conquering Gaul, a fragile equilibrium was maintained. But should one piece of this 3-legged stool break, the entire structure would collapse, plunging Rome once more into the abyss of civil war. By 1561, the ideological chasm sundering France had become too vast for even Catherine de Medici's considerable political talents to bridge. Her attempts at reconciliation, epitomized by the colloquy of Poissy, had ended in acrimonious failure. Theologians from both the Catholic and Protestant, or Huguenot, camps proved more interested in denouncing each other as heretics than in finding common ground. For Catherine, the regent, acting for her young son, King Charles IX, the dream of a unified French church was dead. Yet the alternative, civil war, was a horror she was determined to avoid. It was in this desperate climate that she made the most audacious gamble of her political life. In January 1562, she pushed through the Edict of Saint-Germain. For the first time in the kingdom's history, the edict granted limited formal tolerance to the Huguenots, allowing them to worship in private within towns and publicly in the countryside. It was a revolutionary act, a pragmatic attempt to legislate peace where faith had failed. To the hardline Catholic faction, led by the powerful and arrogant Guise family, this was not pragmatism. It was sacrilege. They saw it as an unforgivable concession to heresy, a pollution of the sacred soil of the most Christian kingdom of France. Catherine had known she was taking a risk, but she had underestimated the sheer vehemence of the opposition. She had crossed her own Rubicon, making a decision from which there was no retreat. The die was cast, but it landed not on peace, but on war. Just weeks later, on March 1, 1562, Francis, Duke of Guise, and his retainers intercepted a congregation of Huguenots worshipping in a barn in the town of Vassy. The confrontation escalated into a massacre. Guise's men slaughtered dozens of unarmed men, women, and children. The news ignited the nation. The massacre of Vassy was the spark that lit the powder keg, plunging France headlong into the first of what would be 8 devastating wars of religion. Catherine's bold move for peace had, through the brutal intransigence of her enemies, become the very catalyst for the conflict she dreaded most. The First War of Religion was a brutal awakening for Catherine. Her policy of moderation was in ruins, and the kingdom was tearing itself apart. The Catholic faction was dominated by a triumvirate of powerful nobles, but its undisputed leader and military powerhouse was Francis, Duke of Guise. He was the hero of Catholic France, a man whose charisma and military prowess were matched only by his religious fanaticism and towering ambition. For Catherine, he was a constant threat, a figure whose power often eclipsed that of the crown itself. He had dominated her first son, Francis II, and now he sought to dictate policy to her as regent. In the theater of war, he was a veritable dictator, commanding the Catholic armies with an authority that brooked no dissent. As the war raged, the Duke of Guise laid siege to the city of Orléans, a key Huguenot stronghold. Its fall seemed inevitable, a blow from which the Protestant cause might not recover. It was here, at the height of his power, that the political landscape of France was irrevocably altered. On the evening of February 18, 1563, as he returned to his camp, the Duke was shot in the back by a Huguenot nobleman named Jean de Poltrot de Mireille. He lingered for 6 days before succumbing to his wounds. The assassination sent shockwaves across the nation. For the Huguenots, it was a moment of divine deliverance. For the Guise family, it was a tragedy that cemented a blood feud, as they immediately laid the blame on the Protestant leader, Admiral Gaspard de Coligny, an accusation that would fester for years with deadly consequences. For Catherine de Medici, the death of this French Caesar was a moment of profound and complex opportunity. While she publicly mourned and condemned the act, the removal of her most overbearing rival was an undeniable political blessing. With the Catholic faction momentarily leaderless and in disarray, Catherine seized the initiative. The dictator was dead, and the balance of power had dramatically shifted. She moved quickly to negotiate with the stunned Protestant and Catholic leaders, brokering a truce that led to the Peace of Amboise just weeks later. The Queen Mother had witnessed her own Ides of March, and like the conspirators in Rome, she now stood in the center of a vacuum, ready to reclaim power for the crown. With the first religious war concluded by the Peace of Amboise and her chief rival, the Duke of Guise, removed from the board, Catherine de Medici embarked on her most ambitious project of statecraft. Her goal was nothing less than to forge her own version of the Pax Romana, a Pax Gallicana for a fractured France. Like the Roman Emperor Augustus, after decades of civil war, Catherine sought to establish an era of peace, stability, and renewed reverence for central authority. Her instrument for this grand design was her son, the young King Charles IX. To solidify his reign and the fragile peace, Catherine orchestrated a monumental royal progress, a grand tour of the kingdom that would last for over 2 years, from 1564 to 1566. This was no mere journey. It was a colossal undertaking, a mobile government and court of thousands snaking its way through the provinces. The tour's purpose was manifold. It was designed to physically display the king to his subjects, forging a personal connection and reinforcing the idea of a unified nation under one monarch. As the royal procession moved from city to city, Catherine and Charles held court, heard grievances, dispensed justice, and relentlessly enforced the terms of the peace edict, often against stubborn local parliaments and governors. It was a masterclass in political theater. Catherine, ever the impresario, organized a series of breathtakingly lavish festivals and ceremonies known as magnificences. These events, filled with allegorical pageantry, mock naval battles, and opulent balls, were designed to awe the nobility and foreign dignitaries, projecting an image of immense Valois power, wealth, and cultural sophistication. The most famous of these occurred in Bayonne, where Catherine met with her daughter Elizabeth, the Queen of Spain, and the formidable Duke of Alba. While ostensibly a family reunion, it was a high-stakes diplomatic summit. This was Catherine's golden age, a period where she actively constructed an image of a restored and powerful monarchy, using spectacle and sheer force of will to hold the peace. For a brief, shimmering moment, it seemed as if her Augustan age might just succeed, and the shadows of war could be held at bay by the radiant splendor of the crown. While Catherine worked tirelessly to project an image of Augustan peace and unity, the reality of her court was far more complex and, to its enemies, far more sinister. The Valois court of the later 16th century began to resemble a French version of Rome under the Julio-Claudians, a hothouse of intrigue, excess, and scandal, where dynastic ambition was inseparable from accusations of depravity. Catherine presided over a court that was both the glittering cultural center of Europe and a notorious snake pit. At the heart of its dark reputation was the legend of her L'Escadron Volant, or Flying Squadron. This was a group of her beautiful, highly intelligent, and politically astute ladies-in-waiting. Protestant polemicists and court gossips painted them as a squadron of courtesans, deployed by the Queen Mother to seduce powerful men, uncover their secrets, and bend them to her will. The truth was likely more nuanced. These women were skilled political agents in a court where pillow talk could be as influential as a council meeting. Yet the image of Catherine as a Machiavellian madam, using sex as a tool of statecraft, was powerful and enduring. The court's reputation for decadence was fueled by the magnificent but astronomically expensive festivals she hosted. To her critics, these events, with their cross-dressing pagan themes and sensual undertones, were evidence of a morally bankrupt court, led by an Italian woman who had corrupted the kingdom's virtue. Furthermore, like the Julio-Claudian emperors, Catherine had to manage the intense rivalries within her own family. Her children, the last of the Valois line, were a volatile mix. There was her favorite, the brilliant and flamboyant Henry, Duke of Anjou, a gifted commander, but prone to bouts of extreme piety and libertinism. And then there was her youngest, the pockmarked and perpetually scheming Francis, Duke of Alençon, whose restless ambition would cause his mother endless trouble. The tensions, jealousies, and competing ambitions among her sons created a constant undercurrent of instability, threatening to undermine the very dynasty Catherine fought so hard to protect. It was a world of shimmering silks and sharpened daggers, where poison was a whispered accusation in every political reversal, and the Queen Mother of Shadows reigned over a family as brilliant as it was doomed. To comprehend the precarious world Catherine de Medici was born into, a world of shifting allegiances and fragile dynasties, we must first look back to an age that Renaissance thinkers revered as a near mythical ideal, the era of the 5 good emperors. From the year 96 to 180 AD, the Roman Empire experienced a period of unparalleled peace and prosperity, a golden age known as the Pax Romana. This stability was not an accident of fate, it was the result of a revolutionary political innovation. The dynasty founded by the Emperor Nerva abandoned the perilous principle of direct blood succession. Instead, they chose their heirs based on merit and ability, formally adopting them as sons. This system gave the world Trajan, the great conqueror, Hadrian, the tireless builder and traveler, the pious Antoninus Pius, and finally, the philosopher king, Marcus Aurelius. For nearly a century, the most powerful position on earth was transferred not to the emperor's biological son, but to the most capable man for the job. This ensured competent leadership and a smooth transition of power, preventing the bloody civil wars that had so often plagued Rome's history. Imagine how Catherine, the queen mother of a France torn apart by religious strife and saddled with securing the throne for her sickly, often incompetent sons, must have viewed this historical precedent. The Valois succession was a ticking bomb. Her first son, Francis II, was frail and died young. Her second, Charles IX, was unstable and easily manipulated. Her third, Henry III, was intelligent, but deeply flawed and failed to produce an heir. The entire stability of the French kingdom rested on a fragile genetic lottery. The Roman model of adoptive succession represented everything the Valois dynasty lacked: security, predictability, and a guarantee of competence. It was a political utopia that highlighted the tragic reality of her own situation, forcing her to use every ounce of her cunning and political skill to prop up a failing line, forever haunted by the specter of the chaos that would ensue if the last Valois king died without a son. The stability of Rome's golden age was not maintained by wise emperors alone. It rested on a sophisticated system of social control, famously summarized by the poet Juvenal as panem et circenses, bread and circuses, to keep the vast, often volatile population of the capital city docile. The emperors provided two things in abundance: free food and spectacular entertainment. A massive grain dole, the cura annani, fed hundreds of thousands of citizens, ensuring their basic survival and preventing food riots. But it was the circuses that captured the public imagination. The state sponsored breathtakingly lavish and violent spectacles on an unimaginable scale. In the Colosseum, gladiators fought to the death, and exotic animals were hunted and slaughtered in elaborate displays. In the Circus Maximus, hundreds of thousands of spectators screamed for their favorite chariot teams, the blues, greens, reds, and whites, whose rivalries mirrored the political factions of the day. This was more than mere entertainment. It was a powerful political tool. It distracted the masses from real political issues, reinforced the social hierarchy, and showcased the immense power and wealth of the emperor. Centuries later, in the court of 16th century France, Catherine de Medici would prove to be a master of this same strategy. She understood that power was not just held, but performed. Her court became famous throughout Europe for its magnificences, incredibly elaborate festivals, tournaments, mock naval battles, and the nascent art form of ballet. These were Catherine's circuses. They were designed to dazzle and distract a fractious and dangerous nobility. By keeping the great lords of the realm entertained at court, she kept them from plotting rebellion on their country estates. These spectacles bankrupted the royal treasury, but served a vital political purpose: They projected an image of Valois power and cultural supremacy, even as the kingdom was fracturing from religious civil war. Just as the Roman emperors used the Colosseum to manage the masses, Catherine used the ballroom and the tournament ground as her arena, a glittering stage for the deadly game of politics. The Golden Age could not last. Following the death of Marcus Aurelius, the stability of the Roman Empire shattered. The period from 235 to 284 AD is known as the Crisis of the 3rd Century, a 50-year nightmare during which the empire came perilously close to total collapse. It was a perfect storm of disasters. The frontiers buckled under the weight of simultaneous invasions from Germanic tribes like the Goths in the north and the resurgent Sasanian Empire in the east. Internally, the political system imploded. The legions became the sole kingmakers, raising and murdering emperors with terrifying frequency. In this half-century, more than 25 so-called barracks emperors claimed the throne, most meeting a violent end after only a year or two in power. The economy disintegrated as incessant warfare and a breakdown in trade led emperors to drastically debase the currency, sparking hyperinflation. To complete the misery, a devastating plague swept through the empire, killing millions and crippling its demographic and economic base. This vision of a world falling into chaos, of a great civilization tearing itself apart from within, is essential for understanding the terror that gripped Catherine de Medici's France. The French wars of religion were her 3rd century crisis. The kingdom was beset by its own internal barbarians, the warring Catholic and Huguenot factions, led by powerful aristocratic houses like the Guise and the Bourbon. Civil war was endemic, flaring up again and again, draining the kingdom's wealth and manpower. Assassination became a common political tool, mirroring the fate of the barracks emperors. Foreign powers, Philip II's Spain and Elizabeth I's England, intervened, backing different sides and seeking to profit from France's weakness, much as outside forces preyed on a weakened Rome. The economy was in ruins, and the authority of the crown was fragile, constantly challenged by powerful nobles and religious ideologues. Catherine stood at the center of this storm, a lonely figure of authority trying to navigate the maelstrom, using every tool at her disposal to prevent the complete disintegration of the French state. She was fighting the same battle the better Roman emperors of the crisis fought, the battle for survival against the forces of anarchy. Out of the chaos of the 3rd century crisis rose a figure of immense will and administrative genius, the Emperor Diocletian. He recognized that the Roman Empire had become too large and its problems too complex for one man to rule alone. To save it, he made a radical gamble. He did not try to restore the old system. He remade it entirely. In 293 AD, Diocletian instituted the Tetrarchy, or Rule of Four. He divided the empire into an eastern and western half. He ruled the east as the senior emperor, or Augustus, and appointed a trusted colleague, Maximian, as Augustus of the west. Each Augustus then adopted a junior emperor, a Caesar, who would be his designated heir and assistant. It was a stunning innovation. By dividing authority, Diocletian multiplied the empire's ability to respond to threats on multiple fronts simultaneously. It created a clear line of succession designed to prevent the civil wars that had defined the preceding decades. It was a desperate, revolutionary act, a decision to partition power in order to preserve the whole. This principle of strategic division to prevent total collapse is a key to understanding some of Catherine de Medici's most controversial policies. She spent her life fighting for the unity of France and the authority of the crown. Yet, at several crucial moments, she was forced into her own version of Diocletian's gamble. Faced with an intractable Huguenot rebellion and a kingdom bleeding from endless war, she became a key architect of several edicts of pacification, such as the Edict of Amboise in 1563 or the Peace of Monsieur in 1576. These decrees granted Protestants limited rights of worship and, critically, designated specific safe towns where they could live under their own protection. To her ultra-Catholic enemies, this was an unforgivable betrayal, a division of the sacred unity of the Catholic kingdom. But for Catherine, it was a pragmatic choice. Like Diocletian, she recognized that the state was on the brink. By granting a form of limited, controlled division, she hoped to, by peace, lower the political temperature and save the kingdom from shattering completely. It was a gamble that true unity could be restored later, but only if the state itself survived the present crisis. The fragile peace of the Tetrarchy, Diocletian's radical solution to governing the immense Roman Empire, shattered upon his abdication. The machine of 4 rulers, designed for stability, instead produced a vortex of ambition and civil war. Into this crucible of conflict stepped Flavius Valerius Constantinus. The son of a Caesar, proclaimed Augustus by his troops in Britain, Constantine was a man defined by audacious ambition and a keen understanding of power. His march into Italy in 312 AD was a gamble of epic proportions, a direct challenge to his rival Maxentius, who held Rome itself. Outnumbered and deep in enemy territory, Constantine needed more than military genius. He needed a sign, a conviction that would galvanize his men and justify his breathtaking risk. According to legend, on the eve of the decisive battle at the Milvian Bridge, he saw it. A vision in the sky, a cross of light superimposed on the sun, accompanied by the words, "In hoc signo vinces," "In this sign, you will conquer." Whether a divine miracle, a meteorological event, or a brilliant piece of psychological warfare, it worked. Constantine ordered his soldiers to paint the Chi Rho, a Christian symbol, on their shields. The next day, his forces drove the armies of Maxentius into the Tiber River, securing not just a military victory, but a mandate that would alter the course of Western civilization. A year later, in 313 AD, Constantine and his co-emperor Licinius issued the Edict of Milan. This was not a declaration of Christianity as the state religion, that would come later, but a landmark decree of religious tolerance. It officially ended the centuries of brutal, sporadic persecution of Christians, allowing them to worship freely and restoring their confiscated properties. This act fundamentally intertwined the fate of the burgeoning faith with the destiny of the Roman state. Constantine's revolution culminated in the founding of a new capital, a new Rome, on the site of the ancient Greek city of Byzantium. Named Constantinople, it was strategically brilliant. But more importantly, it was conceived as a Christian capital, free from the pagan traditions of old Rome. The crown and the cross were now fused, creating a new kind of empire and a new kind of emperor, one who ruled not just by the sword, but by the will of a new god. The shock wave from Adrianople reverberated for decades, crippling the empire's ability to effectively police its own borders. The West, in particular, became a patchwork of Roman administration and burgeoning barbarian settlements. It was in this climate of managed decline and simmering resentment that a Visigothic leader named Alaric rose to prominence. Alaric was a product of the Roman system. He had served as a foederatus, leading his Gothic troops in the service of the empire. Yet he and his people were consistently denied what they truly sought: full integration, legitimate titles, and secure lands within the empire. Frustrated by the political machinations and broken promises of the Western court, which was now safely ensconced in the marsh-protected city of Ravenna, Alaric turned his formidable army against the symbolic heart of the empire, Rome itself. The Eternal City had not been violated by a foreign enemy for nearly 800 years, protected by its powerful walls and the even more powerful myth of its own invincibility. Alaric's campaign was less about conquest and more about extortion. He besieged the city 3 times between 408 and 410 AD, each time tightening the noose. Inside the walls, the population starved. The Roman Senate paid immense ransoms of gold, silver, and silk, but the weak and indecisive Emperor Honorius refused to grant Alaric the political concessions he demanded. On the night of August 24th, 410, the breaking point was reached. A gate, the Salarian Gate, was opened from within, either by treachery or by desperate slaves, and the Visigoths poured into the city. For 3 days, they sacked Rome. While the destruction was not as total as later accounts would suggest, Alaric, himself a Christian, ordered his men to spare the churches. The psychological impact was immeasurable. The news sent a shudder through the entire Roman world. Thinkers like St. Jerome lamented, "The city, which had taken the whole world, was itself taken." The sack of 410 shattered the aura of inviolability that had surrounded Rome for centuries. It was a clear, brutal signal that the Western Empire could no longer protect its own core. The institution was hollow, the emperor was powerless, and the heartland was now vulnerable to any barbarian leader with enough ambition and a strong army at his back. The sack of 410 was not the end, but it was the beginning of the end. In the decades that followed, the authority of the Western Roman Empire evaporated like mist in the morning sun. Britain was officially abandoned to its fate. Gaul, Spain, and North Africa, the breadbasket of the empire, were carved up by a host of Germanic peoples: Visigoths, Franks, Suebi, and Vandals. The emperor, a figurehead isolated in Ravenna, ruled over little more than the Italian peninsula, and even that was a fiction. The true power was wielded by a succession of barbarian generals who held the title of Magister Militum, or Master of the Soldiers. These men, Stilicho, Aetius, Ricimer, were the puppet masters of the late empire. They appointed and deposed emperors at will, treating the imperial throne as a tool to legitimize their own authority over the dwindling Roman military. The emperors themselves were often children or political non-entities, their reigns brief and meaningless. This long, agonizing decline reached its quiet, almost anticlimactic conclusion in 476 AD. The emperor at the time was a young boy, ironically named Romulus Augustulus, a pathetic echo of Rome's legendary founder and its first great emperor. His father, the general Orestes, had placed him on the throne. But the barbarian troops who formed the backbone of the army in Italy, led by the Germanic chieftain Odoacer, mutinied, demanding land. When Orestes refused, he was captured and executed. Odoacer then marched on Ravenna and faced the boy emperor. There was no great battle, no last stand at the palace gates. Romulus Augustulus was simply deposed. In a profoundly symbolic act, Odoacer chose not to name a successor or claim the imperial title for himself. Instead, he gathered the Western imperial regalia, the diadem, the purple robes, the scepter, and sent them to the Eastern Emperor Zeno in Constantinople. The accompanying message was clear: a separate emperor in the West was no longer necessary. One emperor was sufficient for the whole. With that simple administrative act, the Western Roman Empire, an institution that had shaped the world for over a millennium, ceased to exist. It did not fall in a single, fiery cataclysm, but was quietly and officially retired.